question is, what social work skills or experiences do you feel were particularly helpful for you when you started to look at politics?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. So for me, the anti-oppression framework and anti-racism approach was important for my campaign, for my campaign team. Thinking through how does our campaign actively try to seek to identify and reduce and remove racially inequitable outcomes and power imbalances between groups and the structures that sustain these inequities in our community. And for Scarborough, it's a quite diverse and large community and diverse in so many ways. And whether economically, class and immigration status, we're working with a lot of things. So thinking about how do we put the spotlight and move a lot of the lived experiences and voices of those in the margins and putting it to the center, and how do we amplify those voices in our campaign, and ideas around like mobilizing from the ground up. I think I heard one of the panelists also mentioning that, and ideas like advocating from behind. These sorts of learnings that I learned coming up in my social work education and continue to influence my work and how we try to actualize these philosophies and frameworks and thought processes. I want to say too that I think the finesse to navigate between gray spaces is really the strength of social workers. We work within those nuances and we're really great at recognizing them, and we're really, really skilled at activating and advocating pockets and spaces, these pockets and spaces to affect like what we've learned in school as like these transformative change. We're really good at working within those nuances. And I always say, like politicians politic, and social workers and politics social work. And what I mean by that is that we as social workers are called into situations when things are bad. We're never called because things are good, right? We walk into the rooms and participate in some of the most difficult conversations to diffuse situations, to build rapport and bridges with patients and clients. We work with them to create solutions. We advocate for them when they cannot, do that for themselves. These are even just some of the most basic skills that I took with me and my fighting spirit, I guess you can say, to the doors when I canvassed, to the tables that I sat on, in front of the cameras when I had to be in front of the camera. The work, as all of my panelists, fellow panelists will say, the work, it was really hard, but I knew that it was something that I could do because I'm a social worker and really proud. And I always, yell that to the top of the mountain whenever someone would give me the chance to. So
I think we're all feeling that fighting spirit. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's essential. Great. Thank you. Yvonne, I think, is next, I think.
Thanks. Wow, it's a tough act to follow, Veronica. I love everything you said. I think you're going to have like 150 people signing up for a campaign soon. So I think, like I said earlier, I was always drawn to community work. So I really wanted to work on systems change and work at a grassroots level. So doing community development work, doing outreach and engagement, these were really important skills that I learned in practicum and in school, doing my BSW, my MSW. And I think those were probably two of the most important pieces because that's what really being on a campaign and being in the community, engaging people is really all about. Of course, being able to listen, which is a thing that we know is so critical as a social worker, and listening in a very authentic and real way. So taking a genuine interest in people's needs and situations, it's absolutely critical if we want to gain people's trust and engage with them. So I think authenticity, being yourself, like really tapping into what people are experiencing, because you convey that sense of trust and you convey that sense of what is happening to you really matters to me. And I think the other piece really that helped so much and probably was the reason that I wanted to be in social work, but also in that particular type of work and then politics as a result, was kind of critical analysis and systems work, thinking, anti-oppression, intersectionality, the idea that you have to unpack everything. You should take nothing at face value, which I think is something that came a lot from my dad. He would always say, why do you think things are that way? So it got me thinking at a young age that everything had to be looked at, but certainly all of those skills of analysis, it's such a wide range. And I think, as Veronica said, we have to work at all levels. So even when we're working with individuals, we know that behind that and surrounding them is systems of barriers, oppression, all the different components that make up a person's life. So you're never just looking at what's in front of you. You're always looking at what's all around, around that person and around you as options for trying to make change. So thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, I love the idea of being your authentic self, as difficult as that is in politics. And I know somebody in the chat was talking about, at least what I took from is the difference between perhaps a lot of lawyers being in politics versus maybe having social workers in politics, and about what the difference would be. And maybe it's that, who do you trust more? I don't know. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, maybe we can move on to our next panelist, please. I think it's, I lost track. Sorry. Noka, I think it is.
Sure. I think, Veronica and Yvonne, you described so many skills that I was just, nodding along because it resonated quite a bit with me. I agree with everything from listening to, and that's really important, and just, being able to genuinely be concerned about the issues people are experiencing in their daily lives. That's what government is supposed to do. You're supposed to fix the problems people are experiencing in their daily lives. You're supposed to provide systems that serve the needs of everyone, and meet meet the outcomes we want in society. So for me, I would say the biggest, and I think York was me studying it at York was a big factor. Of course, the anti-racism and anti-oppression lens was a big thing. That was most of my work, but also just having the understanding that the system is a structure that was made up by people, and that can change with the right people in the right places. When you get elected, whether it's at the school board or at city council or at the federal or provincial level or anywhere, first thing you're going to hear is you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't say this and you can't say that. And you can't, for me, it was even worse because I was 25 and the average age in the room was, you could guess, 55 plus, if not 60 plus. So here comes this young woman who thinks she knows things, but we've been here for 20 years. And it's this is something I would sometimes bring up, but the chair of the board, who was the chair at the time when I was there, my first term, not my second term, because she had retired, was elected the year I was born. So that's a very different reality to be in, where, you show up, you're this young, minority female from an ethnic minority, a religious minority, an immigrant background, and somebody who is moderating the conversation, who is, the head of the institution, was elected the year you were born. And, just being able to have that understanding that, just because somebody says you can't do something doesn't mean you can't do it, right? It just means you got to push a little harder and fight a little harder and, get allies on your side. And that's exactly what I did. And I think I credit York a lot, my education at York, for just not taking no for an answer. And well, that's how the system works. So we've always done it this way. I can't speak for other institutions. I didn't go to any other institution, but really, I think those are the skills that helped me shape the work that I've done. But of course, listening, being compassionate, caring about people, right? Social workers care about people, right? We're not in it for the bottom line. We don't make enough money. They don't pay us that well. Let's be honest. So, it's all of those things coming together and maybe a little bit of personality and a good sense of humor that helped along the way.
Noka, and maybe for others, there's a question in the chat. Maybe we could continue this conversation because you brought this point up, and it just asks about how did you face misogyny and racism in your roles? Because you talk sort of about the old boys network,
Yeah.
age and gender, but just if you wouldn't mind, just if you could comment on that.
I could write a book about that, but a lot. You know, I was, you know, threatened to have my mic cut off when I was speaking in public. I've had motions being ruled out of order. This is in public, like it's well documented. There's a reason why the government's had to step in to Peel. So I had I wrote a motion once, and this was really important. So we had at Peel, we had terrible experiences with police in schools. And we had an SRO program, and you know, there was a student, and I'm sure you've heard about this. There was a 6-year-old who was arrested in a school in Peel. It became a big thing. Anyway, that wasn't okay with me. That's not okay, right? And I won't get into the details of the case, but something had to be done. And then we would, because of my exposure to the public and because of the work I was doing and you know how I presented myself, I would get calls, and I would meet with parents who would tell me stories that are horrible of things that happen in schools. So I decided to put a motion forward to review this program, right? Review the program. And the chair at the time, different chair, but also had been there for a long time, ruled it out of order. And that ended up with, you know, people being very unhappy, and, you know, people voicing their concerns, and the police were called. And anyway, it turned into a really big thing, but the police were called completely unnecessarily, which was very ironic. And then we were told to go to this private meeting, which I refused to go to because I thought, well, I'm not doing that. So I stayed outside with the community. Anyway, long story short, it was things like that. You know, always not, you know, having your voice consistently questioned, and having your, I'm an equal. We're sitting at the same table, right? We got elected the same way. The same process that put you in that seat put me in this seat, right? But to have to consistently, you know, restate your arguments over and over and over again, and even when you have the public support, you know, you're still, you know, having to fight internally. I've experienced tone policing. People have told me to watch my tone, and I'm like, what's wrong with my tone? I sound fine, right? But it's those things that are very subtle, but it's almost these experiences of somebody having to put you in your place, right? Because you're not welcomed at that table. And yeah, it was rough, but hey, don't let my experience ever discourage you, because we need strong women. We need strong people who care about the community. We need people from different ethnic backgrounds. We need social workers. We need engineers. We need doctors. We need everybody to get involved. That's how you make a system better. It's not good to have politicians in the same job for 30 years. It's terrible, right? So that needs to change. Anyway, I'm getting a little off.
No, we appreciate it, the passion and the message. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where is that? Chara, I think, is next up for a comment on the second question, if you wouldn't mind, please.
I'll underline and echo a lot of what the other panelists have said. To take it maybe a little bit differently, I'll get a little bit more granular in terms of the skills that I used as a social worker in my political career. And when I ran for office twice. Listening key. One of the things though that I've really has influenced the way I do both politics and community organizing is meeting people where they're at. Like that's where we start, and that's where we always start, and that can look like a lot of different things in a political campaign. I mean, Milka mentioned this. It's door knocking, like literally meeting people where they're at, where they live, and listening and learning from your neighbors in that way. I can't think of a thing that is more impactful and more productive when it comes to both community organizing and running a political campaign is meeting people where they're at. And in the same way, one of the ways that, I mean, my campaign team would often be like, Yara, you're the candidate, you know, you can't be the social worker at every single door, right? Which, you know, is fair, but sometimes you got to lean in. And with both of my campaigns, and this became a big part of my campaign this year, was we set up a campaign office that was, yes, of course, like a political campaign office where our goal was to run a campaign, put up electoral signs, get people to vote for us. Like that was definitely a big part of that office. But an equal part of that office was community service navigation. And in the same way, meeting people where they're at and finding a way to directly assist people for, you know, like I've mentioned this before, the system is extremely complicated by design, right? And so using those skills and with the help of actually some folks that are even on this call, helping people navigate that. And then empowering folks to be a part of changing the same system that's failing them. So that's kind of a really granular way in which I've used social work in both of my political campaigns. And it really does, it changes the game. It's not the way politics is usually done, but it really does change the game, and it changes the experience of people interacting with a political campaign or the electoral system.